thank you to the Religion and Media Centre for inviting me here to share some of my thoughts as President of TRS UK and also as the Director for the Centre for Sikh and Panjabi Studies at the University of Wolverhampton. So for those of you who are not aware of TRS UK, it's actually Theology and Religious Studies UK. We are the umbrella body for all departments of religion and theology across all universities in the UK. We also work very closely with various organisations whose focus is around studying faith and religion. And we also have strong links with teaching organisations such as NATRE and other traditionally referred to as RE organisations. So prior to teaching religion at university level, at higher education level, I was head of religious studies in a secondary school. So I'm very passionate about how we lobby to ensure that religious studies as a subject, as a discipline, is given a degree of seriousness in our schools today. So from the time when I was in school to today, to 2023, actually it really saddens me that religious education or religious studies, however we refer to it at the moment, is still not part of the national curriculum. So RE is the content of RE is decided locally by what's known as the SACREs, which is the standing committees around RE, and they decide what are the needs locally, you know, which faith communities, etc., are based locally. And I think that's quite unfair, actually, because not all children across the UK get an equal insight into the various religions that we have around us today. So again, it's very important that we continue lobbying for our subject, and one of the most current efforts is the whole rebranding of how we use the term religious studies and religious education into actually using the term worldviews. So I'm actually in favour of worldviews, having 3 children of my own whom I just could not bribe enough to take religious education at GCSE and A-level. It makes me think that actually that whole term, religious education, religious studies, it's quite outdated, and it comes across as quite confessional as well. So, you know, in RE or religious studies, we don't just sit around a table praying to a god or a divine being. We actually talk about ethical issues. We talk about morality. We talk about religion, politics, history, etc., etc. So for me, worldviews is a good way forward, and it actually encompasses what we want to do in the classroom with our emphasis of moving away from the textbook and very much focusing on lived experience. But nevertheless, for me, alongside that worldview label, the term religion or faith must still be in there. Otherwise, it becomes very broad, and then we're at risk of our very discipline becoming diluted again. So I'm delighted that TRS UK, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Religion and Media Centre, and this is the platform from which we can lobby for the future of religious studies in schools, but also a platform from which we can equally work to look at how faith, religion, belief, whatever we refer to it as, is represented in the society around us. So as well as being the president of TRS UK, and actually I'm the first president of colour in the history of TRS UK, which really shows how we are changing as a society, as British society. So alongside that role, I also am director for the Centre for Sikh and Panjabi Studies, which is actually the only academic centre relating to researching the Sikhs, not just in the UK, but across Europe as well. So what this does, again, it gives us that platform from which to look at how Sikhs, for example, are represented in the media. It gives us this platform to look at ways in which we talk about the Sikhs, ways in which we use terminology. So, you know, the very fact that there is a continuing dislike to use the term Sikhism, the ism on the end of a number of faiths is a very colonial way of looking at faiths, especially that sit outside of the traditional Abrahamic faiths. So the representation of the Sikhs here in British society, it was generally positive around COVID. You know, our efforts were highlighted in terms of the food banks that we were putting on, the various oxygen seva means selfless survey, that Sikhs were providing around the world as well. So as a Sikh myself, it is very important to me as to how my community is represented by the media. However, in 2023, there is still some misunderstanding, especially around the outward identity of a Khalsa Sikh. So a Khalsa Sikh is one who has taken initiation and is therefore required to not cut their hair, and hence that's where the turban and the beard also come in. So, you know, the whole mistaken identity of a Sikh is something that we're still facing in 2023, mostly as a repercussion of 9/11, still carrying on to this day. Post 9/11, images everywhere we saw a turban and a beard equals a terrorist. And you may not know this, but the first victim of 9/11 in terms of society was actually a Sikh petrol owner in Arizona because of his turban and because of his beard. So again, during COVID, there was all these issues around Sikhs were being almost forced to trim their to trim their beards because of the equipment around COVID which needed to be used. And again, this comes down to a lack of faith literacy. A couple of months ago, an absolutely damning report was published by the faith advisor to the British government. This report was known as "Does Government Do God?" And we all know where that phrase comes from. And this was compiled by Colin Bloom. A report that took actually 4 years to compile. However, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the majority of Sikhs that I've spoken to, this is absolutely damaging to our reputation as a community. It highlights us as a bunch of misogynists and bullies. I wouldn't be here as a Sikh woman if my community was a bunch of misogynists and bullies. The Sikh faith absolutely puts a female on a total par with a male. There is nothing, according to Sikh philosophy, Sikh teachings, that a woman can't do physically that a man can do. So again, this report, it introduces a whole new range of terms, one being pro-Khalistani Sikhism as opposed to Sikh extremism. Okay, and so again, there are no terms for reference for this. And what's particularly worrying to me is, as somebody who teaches in higher education, it's these kinds of reports that our students quote from. It's these kinds of reports that present images, representations of a community. The main issue that, as a Sikh, we have with this report is its flawed terminology, and also the very fact that there is a disproportionate amount of time that has been devoted to so-called Sikh extremism, which again and again Bloom talks about as not being a major issue in the UK. However, he does make 22 recommendations, and out of those, the one that he makes around faith literacy is absolutely welcome. You know, not just for the Sikh community, but faith literacy on a wider level. For decades, those of us who are concerned with how religion is represented in media, we were constantly calling for the faith literacy of journalists in schools, of diverse organisations, etc. And I really do feel that faith literacy should form a part of journalism degrees and journalism qualifications as well, so that we can actually move away from that horrible term of tolerance, which we use again and again. We tolerate somebody because we have to put up with them. However, if we replace that with peaceful coexistence, with understanding and respect, that will make British society a much better place. And where that starts is at school level, where we teach children about faith, about belief, about culture that is around them. I've run out of time, so I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Opinderjit. I just want to pick up on a couple of things there, and then we'll see if there are some questions. Could you just continue to educate us? If not ism at the end, what? How do we do that? Because I think, you know, it's what we've been used to saying, but we don't necessarily know what the alternative is.
So this growing preference then to drop the ism from the Sikh faith is in preference to use Sikhi. So Sikhi very, very nicely encompasses what the Sikh faith is all about. And then there's this whole issue around religion or way of life. The Sikh faith actually falls into what's known as a dharam, which is a way of life. And therefore, to refer to it as a religion doesn't necessarily always work. So this is where the growing preference is for Sikhi. And we are pushing from the Centre for Sikh and Panjabi Studies for more and more resources that are used at schools, in diverse organisations, etc., to actually use the term Sikhi rather than Sikhism.
It's really ingrained, though, isn't it? And I mean, I'm not just talking about Sikhism, but about the way that we teach religion in schools. The way that I remember when I was doing it, 6 major world faiths, you just go through them. You do that, and then you focus on a bit of the Bible, and you focus on other things as well. But it's really defined. And I wonder if you can explain a bit about this worldview approach, because I've got to admit, I've spoken to people about this in the past. I still don't get it. So tell me what a worldview / religious studies course would look like that a religious studies course does not.
Okay, so currently religious studies or religious education courses are very much focused, as you said, around the world religions paradigm, which is the 6 major faiths. You go in schools that are lucky enough, there would be a dedicated time to each one of those faiths. However, the worldviews approach also brings into the perspective of other children in our classrooms, children who have no faith, children who may sit on the boundaries of some of those faiths as well. So if I take the Punjabi context, for example, in the Punjabi context, there are many families actually who sit on the boundaries of defining as both Hindu and Sikh. So the Ravidasi community, for example, is a perfect example in this. And those of you who teach in diverse areas such as Hounslow, Ealing, will have a number of children in your classes who actually sit on those fuzzy boundaries between those different faiths. So when we try and box faith, identity, belonging into these rigid categories, that is where some of the issues arise in terms of not belonging, in terms of many of the children in the classroom not actually being able to say, well, actually, this is what I feel, this is what I feel. So the worldviews will also bring in the secular approach. It will also bring in the humanist approach as well. If we're talking about understanding some, other people's worldviews, other people's perspectives on a particular issue. For example, we've talked a great deal today about abortion. So, traditionally in the ethics part of religious studies, we would take each one of those 6 faiths and we would explore what each one has to say about abortion. However, under the worldviews context, we can bring in those different perspectives, those different ideas as well. And I know there has been, not everybody is for the worldviews category. There is still a lot of misconception, and hopefully over the coming months, etc., we will be able to produce kind of bite-sized notes, resources, etc., by which we actually really understand what we mean by worldviews.
We haven't got time to talk more about this, which is really frustrating. I think we haven't actually got time for questions. I'm sorry about that, Opinderjit. But thank you so much. Thank you, Opinderjit Kaur Takhar.